So this was one of those Fed meetings after which Fed Chair Jerome Powell probably should have kept his mouth shut. Markets were experiencing a spectacular gain. The Nasdaq was up over 3%, but shortly after Chair Powell began answering questions, markets lost their gains and turned mostly negative. Meanwhile, over at the White House, President Biden was meeting with CEOs, trying to talk them into his impossible dream that spending trillions more that we don't have is a good way to lower inflation, all of which makes today a pretty bad day to look at your 401k. Here now is Russ Vought, former OMB Director and Center for Renewing America President. Good to see you, Russ. Thanks for coming in again. What specifically do you think Powell said that spooked the markets?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the immediacy of the rates that are coming in March and the reality that the Fed is considering moving forward with reducing their asset holdings. But look, this is, quite frankly, it's still been a moderate plan of attack from the Fed from the last several months. I mean, they're still doing quantitative easing for another month. I mean, 7% inflation, and they're still buying bonds. So, wow. The market has over time continued to start to understand that this was coming, but clearly the Federal Reserve Chairman said too much to be able to not take it as smooth as he normally does.
Yeah, again, if they had just released the notes of what they were planning to do and then avoided answering the questions, I think the markets probably would have ended maybe not up 3%, but somewhat close to it. But it was his tone. And frankly, what I heard from his tone was that so much of what he believes does run counter to what the president is saying. He even said specifically that despite all of these huge wage gains that we've seen, most wage earners are underwater because inflation is higher than their gains. So that runs counter to what the president is saying.
No, it certainly does. And, the president has an incentive to continue to make the best case he can. Unfortunately, it's not a very good case. And the chairman is articulating what American people know, which is that when you adjust for inflation, what they're seeing in their pocketbooks is not a pretty picture. And unfortunately, this administration does not appear to be changing course by given the fact that they're meeting with corporate CEOs to continue to pound the pavement on behalf of their bill.
Well, Jerome Powell doesn't strike me as a tough guy, but there is a conflict coming, is there not, between Powell and Biden if they both stick to their positions?
No, there is. To the extent that the Biden administration can just put this on Powell for any tough medicine that occurs, no president is going to want the extent to which an effective response to inflation that the Federal Reserve is going to need to do, and that's going to be more than quite frankly 25 basis point increases, possibly a fourth if you go by what the market is expecting. So, I don't think that's going to get rid of 7% inflation, and so is the Biden administration really going to be signing up for what is going to be necessary? And that may not be even evident to the chairman at this point. I think the answer to that is no, but at the same point, they get the privilege to be able to just put it on him, and they can continue to go and spend as much as they possibly can to make the problem worse.
Well, one thing that is apparent to anybody who's looked at a balance sheet like a normal business person is that you can't keep deficit spending going forever without some consequence. And the consequence when the government does that, of course, is consequence when you're a private company is you go bankrupt. If you're government, you print more money, which means more inflation. CEOs understand that, and yet the president brought them in today trying to convince them, folks who do focus on balance sheets, that there were no consequences for spending money you don't have. How do you think that went over?
Yeah, I'm not particularly surprised, David, because this series of corporations have increasingly become arms and mouthpieces of the regime, whether that's enforcing the vaccine mandate, whether it's their HR departments being the pushers of critical race theory for their employees. And so then to give them a political spin that they can then go out and use to and make sure that there's momentum behind a Build Back Better legislation that's dead, that doesn't surprise me. I just don't think it's going to work. At the end of the day, is this going to be the thing that changes Joe Manchin's opinion? And I don't think it is.
I can almost forgive President Biden for making up some of the numbers that he does in terms of proving in his mind that inflation doesn't result from spending trillions you don't have. But I can't forgive the business people who know that's not true, who have to balance their ledgers at some point. At least for the SEC, they have to do that. So I mean, they're absolute flat out lying when they sort of agree with the president on these fantasy numbers.
Yeah, it's a problem when you have, over a period of decades, the loss of economic fundamentals, and all of a sudden they recur, because they always do, and you see the reality of the way inflation is coming as a result of the spending that we've been doing as a country, and it's just like it catches the political class, corporation CEOs included, in a way that they're not expecting, and as a result, they don't know how to account for it, and they have to kind of make it up as they go, and that's what the Biden administration is doing right now.
Well, you know, it's so refreshing. They're far and few between, but when you find somebody like Elon Musk, for example, who's able to come out with, granted, they're only tweets, but he comes out and tells it, like, at least with regard to inflation, he does. And are there going to be more people from the private sector? Because there are some real free marketeers in there, people who actually do understand how markets and businesses work and are willing to say it publicly. Is there going to be more of a pushback going forward against this kind of deficit spending?
I don't see it at this point.
Okay.
I mean, to this point, I don't think corporate CEOs have any incentive whatsoever to help push in the right direction as it comes to fiscal responsibility. Yeah. The great hope is that CEOs they would say, we need great economic policy, we need a nation again, and we need policies that are good for this country, America First agenda. That's not the way their incentive structure is built right now. And as a result, you see these kind of dog and pony shows that you saw at the White House today, where they come in and they just end up being mouthpieces for the Biden regime.
That's scary.
We need something else. I don't see it happening any differently until there's a fundamental awakening in the C-suite of all these companies.
That's corporativism, and that is a scary thing when it begins to happen, when the government and the corporate entities, the big corporate giants, work together hand in hand. Russ Vought, good to see you. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.